Hey tea friends! In these next two episodes, we'll explore the white tea producing region of northern Fujian, focusing on Fuding and Zhenghe. Fuding is the heavily invested in darling of the white tea world, recognized in recent years as the mythologized birthplace of white tea. Zhenghe, its rival further inland and up the mountain, produces quality tea without quite as much of the same buzz and acclaim. In this particular episode, let's get to know some of the tea gardens and personalities of Fuding, dive into its production process, and learn how to suss out the good from the not so good. Let's go.
Hey tea friends, welcome to Fuding, China. This is in northern Fujian, and behind me is Taimushan. This is considered the birthplace of white tea. And this mythology, somewhat controversial, is based off of an inference by a recent tea scholar who is reading over the Classic of Tea by Lu Yu, and said that 300 li, which is an ancient Chinese measurement from a place in Zhejiang in which Lu Yu was referencing, he really meant to say another direction besides east. Rather, he meant south, which placed roughly Taimushan at that specific measurement. Now, why is this controversial? Well, a li until as late as the 1940s hasn't really been agreed upon as a standardized measurement. So if the li was what it is today, a half a kilometer, we could consider Taimushan as well as Jianyang, as well as Zhenghe, as well as potentially the Wuyi Mountains as also the birthplace of white tea, which all of those, by the way, have an equal but still somewhat ambiguous claim to be the birthplace of white tea. And I consider that this was crowned the birthplace of white tea specifically by the Chinese government because of the General Secretary Xi's history in the administrative district outside of Fuding that encapsulates Fuding, the city of Nengde, where he held office in the late 80s. And ever since that position that he held, he has wanted to fortify the economics of the specific area, which used to be a bit more impoverished. And so nowadays, we have Fuding white tea, and a lot of the content coming out of here being given a lot of marketing, a lot of money, and white tea in the last 20 years has really, really blown up, as we have seen. Now, of course, since the pandemic, prices have begun to level out, the hype has begun to clear a bit, and so you can still have really, really amazing, beautiful Fuding white tea in which the tea producers are sort of retrofitting and fulfilling the self-prophecy that this government has given and endorsed in Fuding white tea, and is making some truly incredible tea. There are some imitations and some scrupulous market practices to avoid, but we are here to snope that out and see if we can get some really great Fuding white tea. So the reasons that Fuding was knighted the mythic birthplace of white tea isn't for any just arbitrary reason. Besides General Secretary Xi's fondness for this place because of his deep roots in this area, it does have a verifiable, legitimate history of white tea production going back several hundreds of years. What's more confusing, however, is that many of the scriptures and texts talk about white tea might have less been referring to the production specifics of white tea, the plucked, withered, and dried genre-defining production specifics, but rather they're talking about the white buds of any and all teas that emerge in the springtime. And so what they might have been considering a white tea in the past might have just been considered an early spring tea that had still those white hairs that you can see on the buds. And furthermore, this is as good a place as any to choose as the birthplace of white tea. I mean, just look at Taimushan. These igneous rocks were formed through volcanic activity in the Cretaceous period some 100 million years ago, and it's epically gorgeous. I mean, it's stupid perfect for growing tea as well. There's sloping, well-draining soil, acidic soil, beautiful plant life. This reminds me of being in Appalachia, seeing all these azaleas and rhododendrons here blooming on April 15th. So it's really a magical, special place. The tea is really great. I just want to draw a little bit more awareness to the myth making that happens oftentimes in the tea industry from the top down, where a specific place is just ambiguously crowned all of a sudden, and so its market value can go up because of that reason. All right, so we made it to 9 Carps Pond here at Taimu Mountain. This means generous grandmother. Taimushan means generous grandmother mountain. It was named after a sweet old lady, apparently, who lived in the Han Dynasty about 1,800 years ago. And when one year a plague broke out amongst the villagers down below, she climbed up these very peaks to harvest wild tea, prepared beverages, took them down the mountain, and miraculously cured everyone. And I love stories like this that you hear all across the tea industry and the tea world and the history of tea. And I love that there's a revitalization of this type of lore here at Taimushan, as well as the temples that are being restored down below that might have been destroyed and abandoned in the last century or so of cultural turmoil. So it's very sweet to be here, sweet to just witness these mountains. They say fairies live here, and I absolutely believe it. All right, so I feel like we made it to the highest point in Taimushan, Taimu Mountain, and just look at this crazy granite structure behind me in the ocean here. I mean, this is a really interesting perspective to just see. You know, we're here at 900 meters. This is one of the highest areas in Fuding, and this goes right down to the ocean. And this is a very typical touristed Chinese mountain where there's just tons and tons and tons of steps. We've probably climbed thousands of steps a day. And now that we're at the top, we will do it all over again, just going down. So grateful to be here. Let's go explore some more Fuding white tea as well as Zhenghe white tea. The Greater Fuding tea production area is mainly comprised of coastal hills, with the average tea garden elevation estimated to be around a modest 500 meters high. This relatively low elevation allows for an earlier harvest window that takes advantage of the full sun exposure during its processing, prior to the cloudier days of mid to late April just before the onset of monsoon season. Solar withering and the bright character it lends to its tea is historically known as a signature feature of Fuding white tea. By contrast, many higher elevation white tea areas further inland from the coast have turned to controlled indoor withering, adjusting for the less favorable weather of their later harvests. While this distinction may be the historical rule of thumb, we'll see if this still holds true across the board with some of today's producers. Of Fuding's tea production zones, from this point we'll focus mostly on Guanyang and Panxi. Let's go hang out with Mr. Wu in Panxi, an area considered a choice terrain for commodity and higher grade Fuding white teas.
And we're ready to roll.
All right, so we're here in Fuding. This is the Panxi core production region. This is the far western side of Panxi, which is west of Fuding City. And we're here with Mr. Wu. He is a fourth generation tea maker in his family, and he drove us up probably an hour into these mountains. We're still at about 400 to 500 meters, so relatively a low elevation for all of the tea world, but relatively high for Fuding. And we are here checking out his 20-year-old gardens, as well as his Laocong Old Bush gardens that are about 50 years old. And I really wanted to talk about some of the garden management practices that are in between these two grades of tea. So this is just a regular tea garden. They call this tidy cha, or tabletop, where it's just managed and pruned basically so they can harvest very, very easily throughout the year. And pesticides are applied by the government. This is a mandated thing by the government, and to help out the tea farmers, the government is endorsing the use of pesticides here in Fuding, which is pretty common, and they're applying pesticides twice a year. I believe he said in June and October, maybe November, and whereas the Laocong grade does not get the use of pesticides. So another bonus for it being older bush material and allowed to grow more naturally is that it also ecologically has an application where the pesticides aren't applied to that. So I care less about the age of the tree, honestly, and more about the garden management practice. And the fact that these bushes are not pesticide sprayed makes me go for teas like this. So Baimudan, Shomei, Silver Needle, all of that stuff. I would rather get it from these old bush and pay the higher price than to get a very cheap and affordable tea from these tidy cha plantations. So really grateful to be here and kind of discover this, and I'll include more notes about the details of maybe what pesticides they're using, because he's saying that they're more of a natural sort of pesticide, which I think is a really important detail. But yeah, more details forthcoming. Really interested to find out more and taste some of his tea. Despite the prevalence of government-prescribed pesticides to these younger plantations, I was happy to see that Wu's family offers an impressive diversity of other garden systems they make tea from. For example, here we are in an uncommon official certified organic tea garden. There's non-certified organic, aka shengtai or ecological gardens, older bush gardens that are kept unsprayed ranging from 40 to 70 years old, as well as quote-unquote half-wild tea gardens seen here. While the greater market demand remains high for cheap commodity-grade teas, I'm glad to report that here in the Tea Mountains there's clear evidence of a market gaining literal ground, one willing to pay more for genuinely cleaner teas. Many buyers have grown weary of dime-a-dozen plantation whites, regardless of how convincing a flavor the modern market has managed to craft into them. Let's go check out Wu's production facilities and see what else we can learn. Rolling? Alright, so we're in Panxi village here. This is in Fuding, and we're Mr. Wu. We were just up at his tea gardens. We want to understand the ins and outs of Fuding white tea processing. So we're here at his production facilities, and here we have the first step of withering. So of course, white tea is cooked, withered, and dried. It seems really, really simple. It's actually a little bit more complex because the withering step can have many, many different phases according to the season. Well, what time of the season, the mini season, if you will. It's early spring, mid-spring, late spring, etc. And as well as the tea that's being processed, meaning the plucking rate, how much of the leaf is actually being withered. So here we have in mid-April, it's April 14th, we have Bamidang production. And of course, these tea leaves have been harvested. Now they're being withered on this mat that is positioned in a specific angle that allows the airflow underneath to wick away some of the moisture. And it's piled, of course, at a specific thin level. And we'll go ahead and we'll flop these tea leaves over before the next step. Now, it's a pretty hot day. So what ideally they would wither this next step at is 22 degrees Celsius. So that's about 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And if the direct sun, which is basically the definition of Fuding white tea, to my understanding, is a more solar dried, withered and dried white tea, they're actually going to do this indoors at this point, which is very similar to what we see in Zhenghe, up the mountain style white tea. And so what they're going to do, because it's too hot, this next step of withering, they will do it actually indoors. And we'll see, it's going to be kind of noisy, but we'll check out this area over here. I mean, it's already pretty noisy anyway, so it's got this indoor withering situation here, in which it's in the dark, and it's ideally 22 degrees Celsius. And this is the second step of withering. And there's actually, oh my God, it smells so good in here. There's a fan, and it's at a specific humidity and temperature. And this, again, is the second step of withering. Ideally, if it was early spring and the sun wasn't so hot on these tea leaves, it could withstand that direct solar attention. But now that it needs to wick away some of the moisture more for this second phase, because it's just the middle of the day, they're going to do it in here. And the third step, they're going to actually bring the troughs out here, and we'll just quickly get a shot. You probably might not be able to hear me because these fans are so loud, but these troughs right here, hold on. They're almost dried, and there's these fans that are running. And this is basically a greenhouse. So we'll come back in here where it's not so noisy. So I hope that audio picked up. But basically we were just in a greenhouse with a lot of fans rolling, and that was the third step of withering. Now, if it was a little bit later in the day, and what they'll probably do to finish that withering step is when it gets down to 22 degrees Celsius, they'll put it directly into the sun. So they're harvesting super early in the morning, and it's not that hot yet, and they can withstand direct solar withering. They'll do that early in the morning, and at this stage in the season, they'll do it late at night as well. So some indoor withering is happening in Fuding, just a matter of when in the season it is. And so this last step that we're going to see before it is dried very briefly in a low temperature oven to shelf stabilize it, not have any moisture left whatsoever, well, probably about 5 to 7% actually, is they're going to pile it here with these tarps over it, and they're uncovering the tarps and at a specific temperature and humidity that will lock in the flavor. So all that really green, fresh, meadow flowery brightness that the sun just put into those tea leaves, that will then go into this, and it will really lock in that flavor and that aroma. So this is a crucial part of the process, and again, right after that, they'll oven dry it, and then it's good to go. So while white tea might seem very simple, plucked with or dried, here in Fuding, this very modern version of this beautiful beverage is a little bit more complicated than that. Right. So you might have heard the marketing slogan, 1 year tea, 3 year medicine, 7 year treasure, in talking about white tea. And this marketing slogan isn't actually some old legend that they've been saying for centuries. I believe it's a marketing slogan that emerged in the last, say, 20 or so years. It's actually quite young. And it's this idea that white tea, likely the stuff that was previously just left over that wasn't good enough to sell, is now able to be sold. And so there has been this injection from the top down from the government to really make Fuding this epicenter of white tea, and the market demands for aged white tea became as such that people began to fake age and artificially ferment their white tea here, putting in fermentation and oxidation, front loading that, and then saying that it was 3 years medicine or 7 years treasure or 10, 15 years old, etc., etc. Now that that has been found out by enough people, producers like Mr. Wu have begun to not even make what they call 新工艺白茶, or new processed or new technique white tea. They are just doing the old traditional methods, and that's not because necessarily people in Fuding have a whole lot of integrity about this. It's just that the market has now begun to catch on to their trick, and they're not going to make this processed stuff, because I'm looking around their factory, and this is something that I actually wanted to talk about in this very segment, was how they make that. And if we were to find another tea producer out there, and I'm sure we could, that is still making new technique white tea, what they're doing is they're gently and abrasively breaking up some of the cell walls. It's very similar to making Hongcha or red tea, or what we call black tea in the West, that fully oxidized tea. And so what they're doing is using one of those rolling machines and slightly bruising in the cell walls to produce a tea that is more oxidized, sort of like what you would get if it was naturally aged in the right storage conditions. Now, they're not doing that anymore here at this particular factory, so that's a bummer that we didn't get to see that. I don't want to say that there's anything wrong with that technique at all, but what I will say is that I don't think that it is very ethical to be selling a tea at a specific higher price and lying about its age. So I'm happy to report that Mr. Wu is not doing that any longer. No shade on the fact that he did at some point, as most Fuding white tea producers have, but now he is just producing tea that will be naturally aged. Alright tea friends, we're here back at Pengqi Village, and this is Mr. Wu, and we're here at his tea shop, and we're demonstrating and tasting and smelling the differences between the somewhat scandalous artificially aged white tea versus the very just traditional white tea. And so the last 10-15 years, the value of white tea has skyrocketed, and the marketing slogan that we've seen that has given that incentive for the market to chase after those well-aged versions. The demand can't be met by the supply, and so what they call the 新工艺 white tea processing, or the new technique white tea processing that we can see here, has emerged. And basically what they do is they roll the tea leaves to break up the cell walls, and that induces and front loads some oxidation. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. That's actually pretty similar to making black tea or Hongcha red tea. But what I find somewhat scandalous is selling this tea in bad faith as a tea that's older than that. So what has happened in the last few years is Mr. Wu has stopped making this style of tea, because once the market kind of found out about that, it essentially de-incentivized tea producers to be making this, because if you could just sell this tea at face value without saying it has an extra price tag of X amount of dollars as a legitimately genuine old tea, then they have to sell it for the standard price. And so basically tea producers have been de-incentivized to be making an artificially aged tea anymore. So just for kicks and giggles, we're A/B testing this, and the difference is really, really interesting. So with this cup, we have a very sweet and sour tea, somewhat sour, somewhat like fruit that isn't quite dried right. And with this tea here, we have a very, very sweet, and the fruit sort of aspect of it is incredible. The fragrance is incredible, and it is just tastes by far and away a much, much better style of tea. The reality is that most of us in the West are probably, and I wish you were here to taste this, is because it would be a very familiar flavor and taste, because
so many of us, and I include myself likely in this, have been duped by this process. We didn't really find out about this thing before it was a little too late, and this started flooding the market, marauding itself as aged white tea. And so this tastes very, very familiar to me. I've had many different teas, and I think most people who are sitting at this table would also agree. And now it's really interesting to A/B test these things, and what I want to present today is maybe a guide to taste testing that, or rather visual testing for which one is which. And besides just the taste, that profile that I laid out, what happens with the new style white tea, the artificial aging, is that when they're macerating those cell walls, they're breaking those up, and so the natural waxiness that you can see on the underside of the larger leaves, especially in a shomei like this, those will be broken up, and that waxiness is basically gone. And so what you'll have retained here in these lower leaves that hasn't gone through that rolling process is that waxiness is still intact. In this unpressed form, and we'll get a close-up of this, is that you can see this waxiness quality on these tea leaves still. And that means that it has not gone through the process of its cell walls being broken up to induce the oxidation so that it can be faked as a genuinely aged tea. So I don't know of anyone who's talking about that much, especially on the Western market, but I wanted to present that as something to just keep in mind as you're gauging if you have a genuinely well-aged white tea or not.
Next up is a visit to our friend Qin in Guanyang, one of the more tucked away and higher altitude tea bases in Fuding. An economics graduate who spends much of his year traveling to international tea expos, Qin is not your usual good old boy tea producer. He enjoys analog film photography, listens to music from all different eras, and always brews tea with water boiled over a charcoal stove. His family has records of tea production dating back to the Song Dynasty, some 30 generations ago, and after giving up a big city career path, Qin returned to these rural beginnings to continue that lineage. He is a tea farmer and producer not because he has no other option, but because he has chosen this life, an intention that comes through clearly in his tea making. Though he produces tea in the greater Fuding area, Qin breaks from convention by primarily withering his white teas indoors, favoring the depths of sweetness and complexity that develops through aging indoor slow withered leaves. With a smile, he adds that he has a secret processing technique that gives his teas an advantage. Let's go check out his tea gardens. So we climbed up the mountain. We're here in Guanyang village in Fuding. This is northwest of Fuding. This is Mr. Qin's gardens. This is all Fuding Dabai. This is the major white tea cultivar here in the area. And we climbed up almost all the way. It goes up a little bit further. That's going to be about 700 meters all the way at the top there. So that's relatively high for Fuding teas. So the general elevation for Fuding teas is going to be as low as 200 to 300 meters in a lot of places because it just goes right into the sea essentially. You will even see tea gardens that are right by the ocean. Rather strange. So grateful to be here. This is a very pristine garden here in Guanyang village, and the tea bushes here they planted probably in the last 20 years or so, so not very old. But I think what is the most important thing for tea, and I stand by this even when it comes to Yunnan pu'er tea with ancient tree teas and all of that, is ecology, the cleanliness of the ecology. And you have some really nice clay soils here that has a permeability that allows for the rain to just flow through. The slope of these mountains allows for that rainwater to just go down, so it's a well-draining slope ecology. And you have a lot of brassica plants. You've got some roses. What else do we have? We've got, it looks like peach trees, chestnuts, pines. We've got ferns, which is always a really great thing to see because that represents a clean ecology oftentimes. So really cool to be here, even though the gardens are relatively young. That gives you a really nice, young, bright flavor to your tea, and it's not gonna be that soupy complex, hidden until the third or fourth steep. It's gonna be really good right out of the bat. So really great to be in this beautiful environment. I mean, check this out. Incredible. All right, so we were just checking out those 20-year-old gardens, and these gardens right here behind me were planted in apparently 1956 or 57, 58. So that is making it here in 2025 at the time of this video. What is that? About 70 years old, almost 70 years old. So in the Laotsong grade, the old bush grade, if you will, in Fujian, they're now calling, especially places like in the Wui Mountains, like 40-year-old bushes are now in that Laotsong category, that old bush category. So I would say this is real legitimate, you know, old bush. Again, this is a Fuding Da Bai variety. These bushes don't achieve the same age as those in Yunnan. They're not going to reach hundreds or thousands of years old at all. And so this is in its peak maturity and old age. And most importantly, it is in a very clean ecology. Here we are, 650 meters up and in this beautiful, beautiful mountainous area in Guanyang village. So the Chin family planted this. It was Brother Chin's father who planted this in the 50s, and it makes some incredible tea. If you had the 2024 Fuding Old Bush Shomei, you've tasted tea from this very acre right here behind me.
Hey!
Calling to us in that clip was Chin's father, the man who as a young boy helped his father plant the plot of tea trees we were just discussing. As the sun was quickly approaching the horizon, he was not only alerting us of dinner plans, this man in his 80s was scaling up the mountain to harvest wild vegetables for our dinner. As golden hour descended on us all, it seemed like everywhere we looked could be made into a stunning photo, the light hitting the leaves at all the right angles. The perfect way to end this last adventure in Fuding. While sharing a meal with this family in this timeless little village in the mountains of Guanyang, all the hype, marketing, and myth manufacturing started to feel far away. Did Fuding's recent crowning have more to do with invested insiders putting a finger on the scale than actual verifiable history? Possibly, but that in no way means there's not authentic, exceptional tea craft going down here. In fact, all this buzz and attention may be giving the right people a purpose to strive for better and better.